Moving into our next session, a little early here, we're going to be talking about the logistics of enrolling and participating in clinical trials. For this session, we'll be joined by Josep Garcia. Dr. Josep Garcia has spent his career working to help promising cancer treatments reach the patients who need them the most. He spent many years at Rausch working on the development of cancer therapies and today leads clinical development at INHIBRX Biosciences. He was leading the team behind the Cron Dragon study, which demonstrated meaningful benefit for patients in a disease with very few treatment options. Philip will be moderating this session as well. A little bit about INHIBRX. INHIBRX is a clinical stage biopharmaceutical company based in San Diego, California, focused on developing a broad pipeline of novel biologic therapeutic candidates. INHIBRX Biosciences utilizes diverse methods of protein engineering to address the specific requirements of complex target and disease biology, including its proprietary protein and engineering platforms. Much of their work sits close to home for this community. Their lead programs include trials in sarcoma and head and neck cancer. Josep, thank you so much for being here. And Philip, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks.
Yes, I want to echo Tim's remarks and thank you very much for joining us today, Josep. I wanted to include somebody from industry who is doing this research on a day in, day out basis. We've learned the basics about clinical trials. We've learned why sarcomas are different and how sarcoma clinical trials are different. We've talked about informed consent. And then we just learned about how you might identify a trial that you're eligible for. So what I really wanted to do with you, Josep, is walk through. We're now just through that decisional process. We've decided we want to participate in a trial. How do we enroll? How do we participate? What does this look like in the real world for a patient today? Not in 1950 or 1970, but trials that are happening today. So why don't I start off with this? What kind of screening tools, when we're trying to decide whether somebody's eligible for a trial on your side of the divide, what are the kind of screening tools that are generally used to decide whether a patient is eligible for a trial you're conducting?
That's a good question. Obviously, I think that, and I think that what I'm going to say is a bit repetitive of what has been said during the whole conference this morning. But I think that about the screening, I think that it's really, from the conversation the patient is going to have with the physician, is going to be clear of what is the type of sarcoma this patient has. So there is multiple types of sarcomas, and each sarcoma has a different treatment paradigm. So sometimes I think that the clinical trials, they are really focused in a different setting. Has the patient received prior treatments? Is the tumor spread in other organs? So these are the type of screening tools, or I don't know, typical answers to typical questions that we'll have to understand if the patient is eligible. Obviously, then once I think that the patient has decided to participate in the study, there is all these typical blood testing to really ensure that actually the patient is fit to receive the experimental treatment. Sometimes I think that when we're really looking for a biomarker, so something I think that even within the specific sarcoma, if the treatment is targeting a specific mutation or a genetic alteration, they might require like biopsy, so analysis of the tumor tissue. So but that's going to be very specific depending on the clinical trial.
Terrific. So you mentioned biomarkers. Can you just say a little bit more about genetic testing? How does that take place? Like, what does the patient do? And that's a very new thing for our patients. I'd like you to say a little bit more about that.
No, I think that this is actually, has been really mentioned in how we, from last 30, 40 years, we were talking about cancer, then subtype of cancer like breast cancer, lung cancer, sarcomas. And now we're really going to much more granular understanding that actually cancer are thousands of diseases within the cancer. And each of them, actually, they are very specific to how can they be treated. how these tumors are so smart. So how can we treat them? And one treatment doesn't work for all. That's very clear right now. So I think when we're really talking biomarkers, sometimes the genetic biomarkers can be specific alterations in the tumor that make the tumor more sensitive to a specific pathways or targeted treatments that might really work for them. So one recent example will be, for example, for the immunotherapy, where one of the biomarkers of immunotherapy is if the tumors express one protein called PD-L1 that might make it much more smart against the immune system of the person. So covering it's actually avoiding that the immune system can target the tumor. And these new therapies, what they are really doing is trying to eliminate that mask. So actually your immune system can target that specific tumor. So in terms of the biomarkers, sometimes can be really specific to the tumor itself. So then you will need tumor tissue. And sometimes actually you might be able to detect it in the periphery, so in the blood. So there's various ways depending on what type of biomarker you're looking at.
So generally it would be a blood test or a blood assay, or in addition to maybe a biopsy of
a biopsy.
Terrific. So you might, for some trials, need to have some tissue taken. You might need to have your blood taken. You might be asked some questions in a questionnaire about your disease history and about your treatment history. Those are the kinds of screening tools we're talking about.
This is history. Sometimes also, additional comorbidities that you might have. Sometimes, some of the treatments might have some potential interactions with treatments that you might be taking for your blood pressure, for your cholesterol. So understanding exactly, what is your status, where you are, what did you have received, that really makes this balance of, are you eligible in a safe way to participate in the study or not?
Terrific. And something a little bit more pragmatic and down and dirty is location, geographical location. Is that a criterion for inclusion or exclusion?
Again, that obviously will depend on the clinical trials, So, when you're really going through a metastatic setting, meaning, that the tumor has expressed in different parts of the body. So I think that usually geographical location might not be such relevant unless, you are in a place like, for example, metastasis to the brain. In some cases, that might exclude you, given that you might need a different type of treatments to really be able to treat them. So that's going to be very dependent of, obviously, the tumor type and the clinical trial.
I actually meant geographical location, like whether you're in New York or you're in Sao Paulo. So is that a consideration? Are people excluded or included in trials based on their geographical location?
I mean, obviously, I think that the problem is, we're talking about, for example, in sarcoma, we're talking about very rare indications. So where the studies are opening for clinical trials, usually they are these academic sites or reference sites. So it's not going to be excluded based on geographic location, but it's going to be excluded based on the capability of the patient to really go to some of these sites where the studies open. Sorry for the geographic.
Oh, no. It was a great answer to a different question. I appreciated it. Why don't we switch gears for a minute and talk about something we talked about abstractly earlier with Denise. But I want to know how this takes place today. Informed consent, so important to protecting patients and protecting their rights. How does that happen today? Is that an in-person process? Is it done generally online? How do you see informed consent processes taking place in contemporary times?
I mean, it is the most important part from a patient to decide to really participate in the study. Is that discussion that is going to have with the clinician about this is a potential study, but then it's really going through the informed consent. And there needs to be a conversation. Obviously, it's a paper. Sometimes I think that, given all the regulatory requirements, I understand that sometimes informed consent can be very heavy in text and sometimes a little bit complex to understand. And here is really where the conversation with the physician, with your clinician that is going to treat you, is very important. And I think it has been reiterated across the whole morning. I think it's very important as a patient that you ask questions. There is no stupid questions. And it's important also you take the time to think, to read, to discuss with the family, but also to come back with additional questions. And I think that's where the informed consent is trying to provide you, is that platform that you can really take home, you can read, and then come back with additional questions. And it's really important that you ask what you don't understand and what it really means for you, specifically in your case. And informed consent, try to be generic, to try to explain to you where are the potential risks, where are the potential benefits, what you will need to go through during the study. But, each case, it's different. So that's why I think that, you need to really ask questions.
Great. And your point is a really important one. Each trial is different. So just generally speaking, do patients need to travel for these? Do they need to miss work? Is it something where you get, a series of potential treatments and need to be off work, on work, off work, and traveling? Or is it a one-shot deal and you're back home and you're done?
I mean, here we're in oncology, so we're in a setting, obviously, we're really talking about a disease that has lethal consequences. Unfortunately, we don't have like a one shot cure. Usually is an ongoing treatment. So obviously that in most of the cases that's going to involve having to go in a regular basis for infusions or for additional tests that you will need to do through the period of the trial. I mean, then as you say, I say every trial is different. Then it's going to depend a lot. Are you really taking a treatment that is a pill? Are you taking a treatment that's an infusion? So that's also going to really change a little bit much more what is the burden of the visits and how much you need to go to the sites. The profile of the drug too, that's going to have also implications. Whether you are in an early stage of a trial where there might be many more tests like blood withdrawals because we still do not understand how the drug works versus where you're already in a phase 3 study where might be much more space visits between infusions and less burden for the patients.
So we heard earlier, those are really helpful thoughts. We heard earlier that the companies and sometimes insurance companies cover the cost of these things. Where should a patient turn to get support with that kind of logistical thing? If they need to travel, take time off from work, if they need to pay for their parking, for instance, at the trial site, that something as mundane as that, who's the right person to turn to or the right place to go to help patients understand the actual logistics of getting to the trial site and getting paid back for their reimbursable expenses?
I think that the most important is obviously the patients will have a single point of contact that is going to be the hospital, the site, and the research team on that specific hospital. This is where they should really ask all these questions and they should be able to help them. Obviously, I think that the support of travel and some of the reimbursement, this is going to depend a lot from trial to trial. Some of them might be supported by the sponsor. These hospitals might have also stipendiums to support the patients, but that should be all centralized and should be as less burdensome for the patients as possible. Obviously, that's in the ideal world. I think that reality is more complex than that.
Yeah, and people need to think of the pragmatic things like, what do I need to bring with me if I'm traveling? Do I need, my drugs that I take every day? Do I need pajamas because I'm going to be sleeping in the hospital? Just the kind of pragmatic stuff like that. They'll find that out from their single point of contact, generally, you said, at the institution that they're having.
They should be able to provide them with that information because obviously each institution is going to have different platforms of support for the patients. And obviously, I think that then when it's really required, whether the pharma to support, we will do it through the institution.
Terrific. And so I'm in a trial and I've gotten maybe the third infusion or the second pill, and I'm starting to feel a little queasy. My stomach's a little upset. Maybe I ate something last night. I'm not sure. What do I do? Do I report that to somebody?
I mean, this is a very important point, Philip, that you're raising. I think that people should always over communicate than under communicate because, it may be something that you ate. We don't know. So it's super important that actually the patients really explain every single thing that they have experienced since the last dose, because this is the only way that actually we can evaluate the drug across the population. I think that there is a lot of fear from patients, which I do understand. Oh, if I say that, they are going to pull me off the study, you know? And I think that should not be that fear. It's extremely important for your own safety that you are extremely transparent. Where are your symptoms? Have you started a new medication? You need to be, because obviously I think there are drugs that for the moment have not been fully validated, and all the information is critical. So that's extremely important to have this open and candid conversation always with your physician.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I like to tell people is, you're in going through your daily life and you're doing this in the middle of your life. There's 30 or 50 or 100 or 300 other people that are doing the same thing as you. And if you have a stomach ache, it may be that 10 other people are having a stomach ache. And it's very important to the team to know that that's happening, but you don't know what's going on with all those other people. You're not communicating with them. So, like you say, over reporting, share what's going on with you. Make sure there's a thing called an adverse event. It's a very big word for folks, but what that means is if something bad is going on, you're having some pain, or you had some kind of symptom that you haven't had before, or something's gotten worse, that's an adverse event, and you report that. There's a system to report that. Isn't that correct?
That's correct. That's correct. And that should be always through your physician, And if something happened between the visits, because sometimes they might be 3, 4 weeks apart, and you had to go to the hospital or to your primary physician because something, you need to report it. And I think it's important that you say, and again, it might not be related to the experimental treatment, but I think that you as individuals, you cannot determine that. So that thing that is reported and the transparency of your journey as a patient is extremely critical.
So you've gone through the trial, you've taken the drug, you've had the radiation, whatever the trial is, you've used the device. Now we're getting to the end of it. Does the patient know if they've gotten, let's say it's a drug and it's a placebo-controlled trial, do they know at some point? Are they unblinded, so they know whether they've received the compound?
I mean, every trial is a different world. I mean, and it depends, how the studies are being. Usually, to read out the results of the study, they take many years because it's the recruitment of sufficient number of patients to evaluate the treatment effect, and then achieving that endpoint that is going to be, the time until your tumor gets worse, or the time, until improvement in survival. So in many cases, I think that, when you really achieve that point, the study gets unblinded. And I think that the physicians get the information and they should communicate to the patients in which arm they were allocated.
And if the compound or the treatment shows promise and it's actually helped some people, let's say you were in the placebo arm and you didn't get that, you got standard of care or you got nothing, you got a sugar pill. Are you going to be allowed to take the experimental drug that's shown some promise? Are you going to get the benefit of that thing that you participated in, creating data to support?
I mean, this is a very complicated question because it will depend a lot of what is the study design. Sometimes, as we're saying, we're really adding new drugs to the existing standard of care. So there are combinations. So, the fact that, you might be then randomized to this new experimental drug plus the combination, or placebo plus the standard of care. So if you fail when the study really, it's unblinded, you might not be eligible anymore if you were in the placebo because you have failed that combination. So then really retreating you with that standard of care that is not a good fit for you will not be ethical either. Then there is these studies, like, for example, I can't really talk about the example of the chondrosarcoma trial that we just ran, that where there is no treatments approved in the relapse metastatic chondrosarcoma. So there was nothing to compare with. So then I think the patients were randomized with our experimental drug against placebo. In this case, because there was nothing, what we did build is actually when the disease was getting worse and there was a central committee reviewing it, the patients were getting unblinded. And the patients who were receiving placebo were able to allow to cross over to the experimental drug. So that's why I say there is no one answer. It depends of the study, it depends of the type of drug, it's going to depend of the setting of the disease. So, but there is many possibilities. And then I think that the second question you're asking is like, what happens, if the study reads out? And I'm still ongoing on that experimental treatment. So usually there is built in all the companies and the studies is built this possibility for the patients who are deriving clinical benefit to continue on treatment until it becomes commercially available.
Is that what's known as compassionate use?
Compassionate use is a different thing because compassionate use is this period while it still is not commercially available where there may be individual requests to the company to have access to that treatment. That really becomes much more complicated question with a lot of regulatory and legal competence. And it depends, is this drug has already been approved in a different indication and now it's being tested in another, so it's available commercially, so it can be distributed easily, is the first time that actually this drug is being tested. So the level of complexity is going to be dependent on where you are in understanding that specific drug.
Thank you so much. This has been so enlightening. If there are questions in the chat, would you be willing to stay on for a few minutes and respond to the ones that you're able to respond to?
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Josep, and thank your colleagues at INHIBRX, wonderful supporter of the Sarcoma Exchange and of the Sarcoma Alliance. We appreciate it very much.
Thank you for having us here. Thank you.
Pleasure.